Alright, and welcome to my latest episode of Acid Head's Smark Talk. This episode is about wrestling versus sports entertainment. And this is kind of a loaded minefield of a discussion topic, of a talking point, because how do you tackle it is the real question here, because the argument can be made that pro wrestling should be about what happens in the ring, in which case you're talking wrestling. Others would say that the wrestling is just what happens at the end of the storylines, and what is most important is the storyline building up to the wrestling match, and what happens in the ring is only part of it. It's not the most important part, the story is the most important part. Well, the reason for that is because you have different viewpoints on what's really important to different people. Some people want to watch the action. For them, that's the important part, is what happens in the ring. For other people, they're more interested in the stories. To them, that's the most important part. The truth is that both are equally important if you want to have both kinds of fans watching. So the real answer to this conundrum of what is really right, sports entertainment or wrestling, is both. You know, saying the comedy elements are incorrect for pro wrestling because you should take it more seriously is bullshit. And so is saying that you should never take it seriously just because it's not real. It's not kayfabe anymore. Saying that, the days of kayfabe are long gone, it's never going to come back, we should just do whatever we can to get the most people watching, is equally bullshit, because then you're never going to please anybody. It all comes down to the most basic elements of what pro wrestling is about. At its most basic, it is a storyline of some sort that ends in a wrestling match. Okay, and how you handle all the aspects that can, branch off from that very simple core notion is where you get the variety, the dynamics of it. This is, like I said in one of my prior episodes, all TV shows, all stories, all movies, anything that is based on storytelling in any way, shape, or form comes down to a simple formula when you break it down. Okay? The most basic, there are only two types of stories. Well, three, really. Happy endings, sad endings, and ambiguous endings. All stories are one of those three. Okay? Although, of course, the real answer there is that there's only one kind of story, and that there is a story is a narrative with an ending, a beginning, middle, and end. Okay? That is what a story is, and at its most basic, that's all it is. Because to say that, you might think a story has a sad ending, but somebody else might actually think it's a good ending for some reason, and vice versa. And what is an ambiguous ending to one person is a very clear ending to another. You cannot dictate how somebody is going to interpret your story. So the idea that there is depth to storytelling, or a certain degree of complexity to any storytelling, is again bullshit, because what's complicated to one person is going to be very simplistic to another person. And that has nothing to do with intelligence. Trying to say that one story is very intelligent because it's complicated and another one is very simple and therefore it is not intelligent is bullshit, because depending on who's reading it, one might find the first story very simplistic and irritating because of it, and the second one very complicated, deep, and interesting to them. It's all internal. All you can control is the narrative you're telling, in which case you do run into the rules of storytelling, which would generally fall under: don't be boring, don't be obvious that it's just a story, because then you lose I keep wanting to say plausible deniability when I mean suspension of disbelief. Suspension of disbelief is how you get into a story. You know you're just reading a story and should have no emotional attachment whatsoever to a character you're reading about, watching, whatever. But you get into it by having that suspension of disbelief, and then you care. Now, I'm not going to go into things like caring too much about things that aren't real. You can care about the artistry. I care about the artistry of storytelling. And I'm critical of those who are bad at it, as far as I'm concerned. So there are rules to storytelling, and with pro wrestling, the basic premise, once again, is the ending can be whatever you need it to be. Any of the three. As I said, any story is a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end, generally speaking. Because really, if you don't have all three of those, then it's not a story. You can write a 3-line story with each line being a beginning, a middle, and an end. You could probably write a 1-line story if that line includes the start of what's happening, something that happens as a transition, and then a finish to it. Okay, I went to the bus stop. Okay, let me try and think here. I went to the bus stop, I got on the bus and went to work. That's a story. It's a very simple story, but it has a beginning, middle, and end. I got on the bus stop as the beginning, I rode the bus as the middle, or however I said it, and I got to where I went to work is the end. Beginning, middle, finish, you have a story. It's not a good story because it's not very entertaining, which comes back to the first point, which is don't bore people. You have to entertain them, otherwise you're not really telling them a story. Now, as far as keeping the suspension of disbelief, if you drove a car to work and none of that story actually took place, nobody's going to know unless they know that you drive a car and don't need to take a bus. Okay, in which case you might need to include some new details. My car was broken down, so I took the bus this morning to go to work. Now you have suspension of disbelief. You could be lying, but they don't have any reason to believe you're lying. Whereas if you were to say something along the lines of, Somalian pirates stole my car, so I had to catch a bus to get to work, and on the way, I met Superman, and he went and he got the pirates and killed them all, and brought me back my car, and I was able to drive home from work. This is a terrible story. There is no suspension of disbelief. Everybody's going to go, you're fucking crazy, or you're smoking something. Can I have some? And if you're doing a farce or satire or spoof or something, that kind of storytelling is fine, because then you're poking fun at things. You know, it's an incongruity is part of comedy, and that's fine. And you know, some people would say, oh, you should never have that kind of element in pro wrestling, which is bullshit, because you can do anything you want with pro wrestling. Pro wrestling is the platform, storytelling is the medium, you know, and what you do with it is entirely up to you. Okay, sorry, my brain just kind of went... I forgot what I was talking about. Sports entertainment versus wrestling. But because there is an established way of doing things with pro wrestling that makes it pro wrestling, because you see, that's the thing, is that once you put a constraint of sorts on your story, for example, if it's a fantasy story, there has to be something that would be considered fantasy within that story. You have placed a constraint on your story. All stories need constraints, otherwise it could be about anything, and you know, where the fuck does this go? So you have to place constraints on your storytelling in order to make it functional and consumable. Because if you write a story that starts sci-fi, has elements of fantasy interwoven in it, goes into mystery towards the end, and then somehow finishes with everybody getting killed for no apparent reason, nobody's gonna fucking buy it. Well, some people might like it just because it's so weird. But as far as storytelling goes, it's terrible storytelling. Why? Because there are no, there's no, how to best put this, there's nothing to grab a hold of. There's no consistency to it. Consistency is really the third rule of storytelling. Entertain people, don't bore them. Give them a beginning, middle, and end, basically. Be consistent. Don't be contrived. Don't be obvious. Don't be contrived. Don't be heavy-handed. Try to be natural when you're telling your story, because that's always going to work better than forcing things to happen. If you try to force things to happen, that's how people write themselves into corners and have to, dig themselves out when they get there. Because they had a plot point they wanted to use and then dug themselves into a hole to achieve that plot point, instead of working their way around till they might be able to work it in, or abandoning it if it just did not work within the story that was emerging organically. Obviously, some people will think that you should just have bullet points and then write a story based on those bullet points, and to fuck with having any kind of organic storytelling involved. I highly disagree with that, because to me that's just contrived. Which is to say, it's fake. It feels fake. And a good story feels like it's actually happening. And if it feels like it's just bullet points being checked off of a list, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it's actually happening. So there's no suspension of disbelief. You're just reading this guy's bullet points with whatever connective tissue he decided to write in between them. Okay? That's just poor storytelling. So, what is the constraint of pro wrestling on storytelling? I've actually kind of gotten into a completely different topic here. I'm going on more about the storytelling than sports entertainment versus wrestling. Well, no, because it's all interconnected. That's really what I'm trying to say here, is that one thing is not more important than the other, because it's all connected. And that you can do anything as long as you adhere to the constraint of pro wrestling. So, there is no reason you cannot have all the elements of sports entertainment that are associated with modern sports entertainment in terms of the pro wrestling industry, but also keep to the basic formula of old school wrestling and give everybody what they want. Because you can do it all as long as you stick to the basic core rules of good storytelling. There's nothing wrong with presenting it with the pyro and the video packages and all that, because it's based on the idea of competition. You have similar things in other sporting events that are, at least as far as most people are concerned, are still real. Some people think they're not. I really don't care either way. But you have instant replays, and you have video packages, and you have build-ups to boxing matches, and there's pyro involved in sporting events, fireworks after a ball game and whatnot. So, trying to say that all these things somehow diminish pro wrestling? Bullshit. It's a show. And other sporting events, real sporting events, use those things to increase the entertainment value of what's going on. So can pro wrestling. Storyline-wise, as long as it makes sense, and at some point there are good matches involved, so you're pleasing the people who want good stories and the people who want good matches, you can do whatever the fuck you want. Just make sure you're consistent and keep it making sense and allow people to suspend their disbelief and enjoy the fucking show. Enjoy the story you're telling both out and in the ring. And that's why sports entertainment and wrestling should go hand in hand. They should not be competitors. It all can work together harmoniously, in tandem, as a team. It all can fit together and work just fine if somebody was out there willing to make it fucking happen. I would if I could start my own wrestling promotion, but I don't have the couple $1 million I would need to do it properly. Seems like a lot of money, I know, but I guess if those of you out there watching were interested enough, we could do a Kickstarter campaign and actually get me in charge of a pro wrestling promotion by building up some interest behind this campaign and then starting it and raising the money that way. It would be possible. If you believe in what I'm saying, and I'm sure some of you out there do, but that's not really the point of this whole thing. It's just a thought I'm throwing out there. Just that, it doesn't have to be WWE or NWA, is what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be CZW, in some ways, or Ring of Honor. I'm trying to use extreme examples of entertainment versus wrestling. It doesn't have to be either or. Chikara is an interesting promotion that uses a lot of comedic elements, but they're consistent. There's a lot of jokey stuff going on, but they put on good matches. And they tell basic but interesting stories to get to those matches. So Chikara is a good promotion, in my view. And, really that's my opinion on that particular subject. Well, my viewpoint. It's not... Everything is an opinion, but at the same time I'm giving solid reasons that make sense, so you can take it as either truth or opinion, whichever. If you would like to discuss that in the comments, by all means do so. I always encourage proper, thought-out discourse. If your idea of such is trolling with idiotic comments, be prepared to get trolled right back. I try to warn trolls away, or invite them to argue with me, because I'll do it. Doesn't bother me at all. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to upvote it, please do so. If you dislike the video and would like to downvote it, do so by all means. It does not affect my ratings whatsoever. In fact, the more people that are voting, the more YouTube likes the video, because people are responding to it. So by all means, either way, hit that vote button. If you would like to subscribe to get updates on videos such as this and the other variety of topics that I'm interested in and post videos about, please do so. If you have enjoyed this video and would like to share it with your friends and other pro wrestling fans on websites, forums, and such, by all means, please do. And I think that wraps everything up. This is Ryan Acid Hits Murphy signing off. Thank you for watching once again. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.